The city from Julian Vance's 40th floor office was a silent, sprawling circuit board, a network of glittering lights and anonymous motion. He saw it not as a collection of homes and lives, but as a system of assets and liabilities, inputs and outputs. It was a map of his victory and the monument to his isolation. The glass walls of his office, clean to the point of invisibility, served as a perfect metaphor for his existence. He could see everything, but touch nothing. Wealth had built him a magnificent cage, and betrayal had long ago convinced him to lock the door from the inside. Inside, the air was chilled and still, smelling faintly of polished chrome and expensive leather. Nothing was out of place. His desk was a vast expanse of black marble, holding only a sleek monitor and a single silver pen. The order was absolute, a fortress against the chaos that had once ripped his life apart. Yet, in the profound quiet of the late hour, the silence wasn't peaceful. It was accusatory. It echoed the emptiness that no acquisition or merger could ever fill. He ran a hand over his tired face, the sharp lines of his suit feeling more like armor than clothing. Another 18-hour day bled into night. His team had gone home hours ago, their hushed goodnights fading into the hum of the building's climate control. He was, as always, the last one left, the king in his castle, utterly alone. A familiar gnawing sensation began in his stomach. Not hunger, but a hollow ache for something he couldn't name. He pushed back his chair and walked toward the executive kitchenette, a sterile alcove of stainless steel and recessed lighting. A pot of coffee sat on a warmer, left over from a late afternoon strategy session. It was hours old, likely burnt and bitter, but it was caffeine. It was fuel. That's all he needed. He reached for a mug, the clink of ceramic on the granite countertop sounding like a gunshot in the stillness. As he tilted the carafe, a voice, calm but firm, cut through the silence from the doorway. "Don't drink that coffee." Julian froze, startled. He turned to see a man he vaguely recognized from the night cleaning crew. He was tall and lean, with a kind, weary face and hands that looked strong and capable. He wore a simple gray uniform, pushing a large yellow cart laden with supplies. Standing slightly behind his leg, clutching a worn teddy bear, was a little girl with wide, soulful eyes and two braids that fell over her shoulders. She watched Julian with a silent, unnerving intensity. Julian lowered the coffee pot, his initial surprise curdling into annoyance. His private sanctum had been breached. "Excuse me?" The man gestured toward the machine with a spray bottle he was holding. "I was just about to clean it out, sir. That pot's been cooking since 3 o'clock. The sludge by now. Besides," he added, his brow furrowed with genuine concern, "the heating element's been acting up. I wouldn't trust it." Julian looked from the man's earnest face to the coffee, then back again. It was a simple warning, a trivial moment, yet it felt significant. No one warned him about anything. His employees told him what he wanted to hear, his board members what they thought he should know. This man, this janitor, was offering an unvarnished, unsolicited piece of kindness. It was so foreign that it felt like a threat. "I'm Marcus Thorne," the man said, extending a hand, then seeming to think better of it and letting it drop. "My daughter, Lily." The little girl, Lily, gave a small, almost imperceptible nod but remained silent, her eyes fixed on Julian. He felt an odd compulsion to explain himself, a weakness he immediately despised. "I was just working late," Julian said, his tone clipped. "I can see that," Marcus replied gently. He moved past Julian to unplug the coffee machine. "A man can't run on bad coffee and no sleep. It's a failing investment." The business analogy, coming from a man in his position, was unexpected. It disarmed Julian more than the warning itself. He stood there, holding an empty mug, feeling strangely exposed. For the first time in a decade, the carefully constructed wall around him had been breached, not by an attack, but by a simple act of human decency from a stranger pushing a mop bucket. And in the quiet gaze of the little girl beside him, he felt the profound, unnerving weight of his own loneliness. Over the next week, Julian found himself manufacturing reasons to stay late. A report that needed triple-checking, market projections that demanded his personal oversight, all flimsy excuses to be there when Marcus Thorne made his rounds. He told himself it was a curiosity, a sociological study of the man who had so easily bypassed his defenses. But deep down, he knew he was drawn to the quiet warmth that seemed to emanate from Marcus and his silent daughter. Their encounters were brief, islands of quiet conversation in the vast, empty ocean of the corporate tower at night. Julian would be at his desk, pretending to be engrossed in a spreadsheet, and the soft squeak of Marcus's cart would announce his arrival. "Burning the midnight oil again, Mr. Vance?" Marcus would ask, his voice a low, pleasant rumble. "The market never sleeps, Marcus," Julian would reply, the words feeling hollow even to him. Lily was always there, a silent shadow at her father's side. She would sit on a small stool she carried, pull out a sketchpad and a box of colored pencils, and draw while her father worked. She never spoke a word, but her presence filled the sterile office with a life it had never known. One evening, Julian noticed her pencils were worn down to stubs, the colors faded. The next day, he stopped at a high-end art supply store and purchased a professional-grade set of 72 colored pencils in a beautiful wooden case, along with a thick pad of textured paper. He felt a ridiculous surge of anxiety as he waited for them that night. What if it was inappropriate? What if Marcus took offense? When they arrived, Julian walked over, the case feeling heavy in his hands. "For Lily," he said, his voice stiffer than he intended. "I noticed she liked to draw." Marcus looked at the expensive set, then at Julian, his expression unreadable. For a moment, Julian was certain he had misstepped, that he had committed some gross, classless offense. But then Marcus's face softened into a grateful smile. "Sir, you didn't have to do that. That's incredibly generous." He knelt down to Lily's level. "Look, sweet pea. Mr. Vance brought you a gift." Lily's eyes, which were usually fixed on her drawing or her father, lifted to meet Julian's. They were wide with a mixture of awe and caution. She slowly reached out a small hand and traced the grain of the wooden box. Then, she looked up at Julian and gave him a small, shy smile. It was the first time he had seen her do so, and the effect was staggering. It felt like the sun breaking through a perpetual fog. She opened the box, her little fingers hovering over the vibrant rainbow of colors. She selected a bright, sunny yellow and began to draw on the new paper. Marcus went back to his work, but the atmosphere had shifted. A fragile bridge had been built between Julian's world of cold, hard currency and theirs of quiet, shared moments. Later, as they were preparing to leave the floor, Lily shyly approached Julian's desk. She held out the piece of paper. On it, she had drawn a stick figure with a briefcase, standing under a brilliantly rendered, multi-hued sun. It was a simple, childish drawing, but it was the most valuable thing Julian had received in years. He took it carefully, as if it were a fragile artifact. "Thank you, Lily," he said, his voice thick with an unfamiliar emotion. She simply nodded, took her father's hand, and they left. Julian stood there for a long time, looking at the drawing. He pinned it to the corkboard behind his desk, a splash of impossible color amidst a sea of market charts and financial statements. Their interactions fell into a gentle rhythm. Julian learned that Marcus worked a construction job during the day and cleaned the office tower at night, all to afford the quiet apartment and specialized care Lily needed. He learned that Marcus was a widower or something like it. He never spoke of Lily's mother, and a shadow would cross his face if the topic arose, so Julian didn't press. He saw the profound exhaustion in Marcus's eyes, but he also saw a fierce, unshakable devotion that was both humbling and mystifying. For his part, Julian found himself opening up in small, incremental ways. He spoke of the pressures of his work, the relentless demands of shareholders, the isolation at the top. He never spoke of the wound that festered beneath the surface, the betrayal that had forged him, but he shared the symptoms of the disease. "It's like running a machine," Julian explained one night, gesturing to the city lights below. Every part has to function perfectly all the time. One loose screw, one faulty wire, and the whole thing can crash. Marcus paused his polishing of the glass wall, his reflection momentarily merging with Julian's. People aren't machines, Mr. Vance. You can't just replace a part when it gets worn out. They need maintenance. They need rest. He looked pointedly at Julian. Even the man who built the machine. The simple wisdom of it struck Julian. He had spent a decade treating everyone, including himself, as a replaceable component. He had optimized his life for efficiency, cutting out attachments and emotions like a surgeon removing a tumor. He looked at Marcus, a man who worked twice as hard for a fraction of the reward, yet seemed to possess a peace that Julian's fortune couldn't buy. And he looked at Lily, silently creating worlds on paper, a testament to a love that was unconditional and absolute. In their presence, the cold logic that had guided his life began to feel not just flawed, but fundamentally wrong. He was beginning to understand that his greatest asset wasn't his company or his wealth. It was the gaping hole in his life they were slowly, gently beginning to fill. A fierce thunderstorm broke over the city one Tuesday night, the rain lashing against the panoramic windows of Julian's office. The wind howled, and the building creaked like a great ship in a storm. The city lights, normally so sharp and clear, were blurred into a watercolor wash of neon. The storm mirrored the tempest in Julian's own mind. A hostile takeover bid had been initiated that morning, a brutal public assault on the empire he had built from ashes. The name on the filing was Derek Hayes, a ghost from his past he had long tried to forget. He was staring out at the maelstrom, the tension in his shoulders like a steel band, when Marcus and Lily arrived. Marcus looked even more tired than usual, the lines around his eyes etched deeper. Lily was subdued, her small hand gripping her father's tightly. "Rough night, Mr. Vance?" Marcus asked, his voice soft, not wanting to intrude, but unable to ignore Julian's obvious distress. Julian turned from the window, the ghost of a bitter smile on his lips. You could say that he decided in that moment to stop deflecting. "Someone is trying to take my company." Marcus nodded slowly, absorbing the weight of the statement. "I'm sorry to hear that." He began his work, the familiar, rhythmic sounds of his cleaning a strange comfort against the raging storm outside. Lily sat in her usual spot, but tonight she wasn't drawing. She just watched the rain, her reflection a pale, solemn face in the dark glass. Julian found himself watching them. He saw the way Marcus's gaze would flick to his daughter every few moments, a silent check-in. He saw the weariness in his posture, a burden carried for so long it had become a part of him. The storm outside seemed to be pulling the truth from the shadows. "Why do you do it, Marcus?" Julian asked the question abrupt. "2 jobs. No rest." "For what?" Marcus stopped wiping down a conference table and looked at Julian. He seemed to be weighing his words, deciding what to share. He glanced at Lily, who was now tracing the path of a raindrop down the windowpane. "For her," he said simply. He walked over and stood beside Julian, both of them looking at the small girl. "Everything is for her." The air was thick with unspoken stories. Julian felt an impulse to know, to understand the source of this man's quiet strength. "Her mother?" he ventured, letting the question hang. Marcus sighed, a long, heavy sound that seemed to carry the weight of years. "Her mother's name was Sarah. We were happy. When Lily was born, I thought my life was perfect." He paused, his voice dropping. "When Lily was 3, we were at a community pool. I turned my back for a second. Just a second. A bigger kid pushed her. She went under. It wasn't long. Maybe 10 seconds before I got to her. But it was long enough." He swallowed hard, his eyes fixed on his daughter. She was terrified. She swallowed a lot of water. She was okay physically. But after that, she just stopped talking. The doctors called it selective mutism, a trauma response. They said she would speak again when she felt safe enough. The rain hammered against the glass, each drop a punctuation mark in his painful story. "Sarah, she couldn't handle it," Marcus continued, his voice barely a whisper. "The silence. the therapies, the constant worry. She said it was like living with a ghost. She said I was so focused on Lily, I had forgotten about her. One day, I came home from work, and she was gone. Left a note. Said she needed to find a life where she wasn't constantly reminded of what was broken. Julian felt a profound, aching shame. He had been wrestling with corporate sharks and market fluctuations, things that felt monumental. But here was a man who had faced the utter collapse of his world, the abandonment by the person he loved, and had not faltered. He had simply picked up the pieces and dedicated his entire being to creating a sanctuary for his child. "I'm so sorry, Marcus," Julian said, the words feeling pitifully inadequate. "Don't be," Marcus said, turning to face him. His eyes were clear, devoid of self-pity. "She gave me the greatest gift of my life. And then she showed me exactly what unconditional love means. It means you don't leave when things get broken. You stay. You work. You do whatever it takes to make them feel safe." He looked at Lily again, a fierce, protective love radiating from him. "So that's what I do. I work, and I build a world for her that is quiet and predictable and safe. And I wait. One day she'll be ready to talk again. Until then, her silence is the most important thing I listen to." Julian looked from Marcus's resolute face to Lily's small form, and the walls around his own heart, walls built of betrayal and bitterness, began to crumble. He had thought strength was about ruthless acquisition, about never showing weakness. But Marcus was showing him a different kind of strength, one forged in sacrifice, patience, and a love so profound it asked for nothing in return. The storm outside raged on, but inside Julian's sterile, 40th floor office, something was finally starting to calm. He was learning that some of the most important assets in the world could never be listed on a stock exchange. The storm passed, leaving the city washed clean and glistening under the morning sun. In its wake, a new season began, not just for the city, but for Julian. The nightly visits from Marcus and Lily became the fixed point around which his chaotic days revolved. The hostile takeover loomed, a constant, pressing threat, but the hours spent in their quiet company were a balm. The drawing Lily had given him was joined by others. A lopsided building, a smiling dog, a boat on a wavy sea. They were a gallery of innocence, a vibrant rebellion against the monochrome austerity of his corporate life. He realized he was no longer staying late for work. He was staying late for them. One evening, he led them out to the executive terrace. It was a space he hadn't used in years, a sad, windswept deck with empty stone planters filled with dead soil and withered, skeletal remains of forgotten ornamental grasses. It was a perfect reflection of his inner life. "I used to think about putting a garden out here," Julian said, kicking at a clump of hardened dirt. "Never found the time." Lily walked over to one of the largest planters. She poked a finger into the dry, cracked earth. Then she looked up at Julian, a questioning look in her wide eyes. It was as if she could see the potential beneath the neglect. "It would take a lot of work," Marcus said, coming to stand beside her. He ran a hand through the dead soil. "But the bones are good. Good drainage. Good sunlight. You could grow just about anything here." An idea, bold and unfamiliar, took root in Julian's mind. "Let's do it," he said. "Together." And so their project began. Julian had landscaping suppliers deliver bags of rich, dark soil, fertilizer, and clay pots of every size. Marcus, using the innate skill of a man who understood how things worked, built a simple but effective irrigation system from some spare parts. Julian, following his lead, found a surprising satisfaction in the mindless, physical labor of hauling soil and clearing away the dead debris of the past. Their evenings were now spent on the 40th floor terrace, under the vast city sky. They worked side by side, their hands in the dirt. Julian learned the difference between annuals and perennials, the needs of a tomato plant versus a rose bush. He learned the simple, profound joy of coaxing life from barren ground. Lily was the silent overseer of the project. She would point to the seed packets, choosing the flowers with the brightest colors: marigolds, zinnias, and brilliant blue delphiniums. She would gently pat the soil around a newly planted seedling, her touch full of a tender, focused care. During these hours, conversation flowed easily. Julian found himself talking not just about his work, but about his childhood, his dreams before they had been corrupted by ambition and cynicism. He spoke of a time when his life was simpler, when success wasn't measured in quarterly earnings. The garden became a sanctuary, a neutral ground where the janitor and the CEO were just two men and a little girl, working together. The stark, cold lines of Julian's world were being softened by the vibrant, chaotic beauty of the life they were nurturing. The symbolism was not lost on him. He was tending more than a garden. He was tending to the neglected corners of his own soul. The more life bloomed on the terrace, the more he felt a thawing inside himself, a dormant hope stirring for the first time in a very, very long time. It was a fragile, tender green shoot, but it was unmistakably alive. He was discovering that true growth didn't happen in a boardroom. It happened here, with his hands in the earth, beside a good man and his remarkable daughter. One warm evening, with the scent of blooming jasmine sweetening the air on the terrace, Julian finally felt safe enough to excavate his own ruins. The garden was thriving, a riot of color against the steel and glass of the skyline. Lily was carefully watering a row of daisies, her small face a study in concentration. Marcus was pruning a rose bush, his movements deft and sure. The peaceful, domestic scene gave Julian the courage he needed. "Derek Hayes," he said, the name tasting like ash in his mouth. "The man trying to take my company. He's not just a business rival." Marcus stopped his work, giving Julian his full attention. He had a way of listening that made you feel like you were the only person in the world. "A decade ago, I had a different company," Julian began, his gaze distant. "My first. I built it from nothing with my best friend, Robert. We were innovators ready to change the world. I was also engaged to a woman named Amelia." He paused, the memory still sharp enough to cut. Amelia was Derek's sister. He took a deep breath. "I trusted them, both of them, implicitly. Robert was the brother I never had, Amelia the love of my life. I put everything I had into that company. My money, my ideas, my soul. We were on the verge of a breakthrough, a piece of technology that would have been revolutionary. I gave Robert full access to my research, my contacts. I shared every secret with Amelia." His voice grew tight, the old rage and hurt coiling in his gut. "The day before we were set to announce our funding, they vanished. Both of them. They drained the company accounts, stole the proprietary code, and sold it to a competitor. To Derek's company, as it turned out. They had been working with him the whole time." He finally looked at Marcus, his eyes blazing with the memory of the betrayal. "I lost everything. The company, the woman I loved, my best friend. All in one day. They left me with nothing but debt and a lawsuit from our initial investors. I was ruined, publicly humiliated." Marcus's expression was one of deep empathy. He didn't offer platitudes or easy reassurances. He simply listened, bearing witness to the pain. "That's why I built this new company the way I did," Julian confessed, gesturing vaguely toward his office. "On a foundation of mistrust. I vowed never to let anyone get close enough to hurt me again. Every partnership was transactional, every employee a potential liability. I built a fortress, Marcus, and I locked myself inside it." He looked over at Lily, who had stopped watering and was now watching him, her big, dark eyes full of a wisdom that belied her years. "Then you two showed up," he said, his voice softening. "And you didn't even knock. You just walked right in." At that moment, a sleek, black helicopter roared past the building, its spotlight momentarily sweeping across the terrace. It was a jarring intrusion into their peaceful enclave. Julian's phone buzzed in his pocket. A text from his COO. "Derek Hayes is in the lobby. He says it's urgent." The threat was no longer a matter of paperwork and legal filings. It had arrived at his door. As Julian looked from the text message to the earnest face of the man who had shown him so much kindness, he felt a cold dread. Derek wasn't just coming for his company. He He was coming for everything. The confrontation with Derek Hayes was as brutal and sterile as the boardroom in which it took place. Derek, impeccably dressed and radiating a smug, predatory confidence, didn't waste time with pleasantries. He strode into the room, his lawyers in tow, and laid out his strategy. It wasn't just a takeover. It was an annihilation. Julian, Julian, Julian. Derek began, circling the massive mahogany table. You've built quite the little kingdom here. Impressive, for a man starting from scratch. Again, the taunt was delivered with a razor-sharp smile. He spoke of leveraging stock, of exploiting regulatory loopholes, of swaying board members with promises of a golden parachute. It was a language Julian knew well, the cold calculus of corporate warfare. But as Derek spoke, Julian's mind wasn't on share prices or proxy fights. It was on the scent of jasmine on the terrace, the feel of rich soil on his hands, the quiet intensity in Lily's eyes. It's a generous offer, Julian, Derek concluded, leaning his hands on the table. Walk away now and you'll be comfortable. Fight me, and I'll burn this place to the ground with you inside it. The meeting ended, leaving Julian with a stack of legal documents that felt like a death sentence for the life he had built. But the true escalation came 2 nights later. As Julian was leaving the building, he saw Marcus and Lily waiting for the bus across the street. He felt a now familiar warmth spread through his chest and was about to offer them a ride when a black town car pulled up beside him. The window slid down, revealing Derek's smirking face. Derek's eyes followed Julian's gaze across the street to the man and his daughter huddled together at the bus stop. A look of cruel understanding dawned on his face. Well, Derek purred, his voice dripping with insinuation. I was wondering what your weakness was this time around. Last time it was my dear sister. Looks like you've downgraded. Tell me, Julian, what's the market value of a janitor and his broken little girl? A cold, white-hot fury unlike anything Julian had ever felt surged through him. He took a step toward the car, his hands clenched into fists. You stay away from them, Derek. Derek laughed, a short, ugly sound. Oh, I won't have to go anywhere near them. But the press might be interested in the reclusive CEO's charitable work. It's a messy story. Power imbalances. Vulnerable employees. Hostile takeovers are so much cleaner when public sentiment is on your side. The threat was clear and vile. Derek wouldn't just attack his company. He would destroy Marcus's life to get to him. He would twist this pure, gentle connection into something sordid and ugly and feed it to the sharks in the media. The car pulled away, leaving Julian standing on the pavement, the engine's roar fading into the night, replaced by the frantic pounding of his own heart. The war was no longer about business. It had become deeply, terrifyingly personal. The next 48 hours were a descent into a private hell. Julian was trapped. Derek's threat had paralyzed him, forcing him to weigh an impossible choice. His entire professional life, the empire he had clawed back from the abyss, was on one side of the scale. On the other was the safety and dignity of the only 2 people who had made him feel human again. The Julian of 6 months ago would not have hesitated. He would have cut his losses, severed the connection, and protected his assets. That was the logical, strategic move. He would have called Marcus into his office, given him a generous severance package, and had him sign a non-disclosure agreement. He would have erased him. But he was not that man anymore. The thought of sacrificing Marcus to a predator like Derek was physically sickening. He imagined Marcus's kind, trusting face clouding with hurt and confusion. He imagined Lily, who had just started to feel safe in this new world, having it all ripped away. He couldn't do it, but the alternative felt just as impossible. If Derek leaked a fabricated story, it wouldn't just ruin Julian's reputation and sink the company. It would drag Marcus and Lily through a public nightmare, the very thing he was trying to avoid. Derek, true to his word, made his move. The next morning, Julian received a call from his head of human resources. A formal complaint had been filed against Marcus Thorne for theft of company property. The accuser was a mid-level analyst in the finance department. The evidence was a grainy security video that appeared to show Marcus pocketing a high-end tablet from a deserted office. It was clumsy, obviously doctored to anyone who looked closely, but on the surface it was damning. An hour later, Derek's ultimatum arrived via a curt email. Fire him by noon. Make it public. Or the video, along with a much more interesting story, goes to the press. The clock is ticking, Julian. Julian stared at the screen, the words blurring. This was the crisis point, the moment where he had to choose. He saw his life branching into two distinct paths. One led back to the cold, lonely peak of success, a path paved with the betrayal of a good man. The other led, he didn't know where. It was a path of uncertainty, of potential ruin, but it was the only one where he could live with himself. He paced his office, the circuit board of the city below offering no answers. He saw the rooftop garden, a splash of defiant life against the concrete. He saw Lily's drawing of the sun pinned to his wall. He thought of Marcus's words, "You don't leave when things get broken. You stay." His choice became clear. It was never really a choice at all. He picked up his phone, his hand steady. He didn't call HR to fire Marcus. He didn't call his lawyers to negotiate a surrender. He called the chairman of the board. "Call an emergency meeting," Julian said, his voice hard as steel. "Now. And make sure Derek Hayes is in attendance. I have something to show you all." The boardroom was electric with tension. The board members sat grim-faced, the air thick with the smell of fear and money. Derek Hayes was at the far end of the table, looking supremely confident, a shark that could already taste blood in the water. He gave Julian a condescending nod as he walked in. Julian didn't return it. He walked to the head of the table and placed his tablet down, connecting it to the room's main screen. He felt a strange calm settle over him. He was about to set fire to his own life's work, but for the first time in years, his actions felt aligned with his soul. "Good afternoon," he began, his voice ringing with authority. "As you know, our company is facing a hostile takeover bid from Hayes Consolidated. Mr. Hayes has made it clear he will stop at nothing to succeed." He looked directly at Derek, whose smirk began to falter. "This morning," Julian continued, "I was presented with this." He played the doctored security footage of Marcus. The board members murmured, shifting uncomfortably. "I was given an ultimatum. Fire the man in this video, a night janitor named Marcus Thorne, or Mr. Hayes would leak this, along with a fabricated story about my personal conduct, to the press, effectively sabotaging our stock price before the shareholder vote." Derek stood up. "This is outrageous. This is a private HR matter. What does it have to do with?" "It has everything to do with it." Julian cut him off, his voice like ice. "Because this video is a fraud. And the man you used to create it, the employee who filed the complaint, is the same man you paid to sabotage this company weeks ago." A collective gasp went through the room. Julian's fingers flew across his tablet. "When I first met Marcus Thorne, it was because he warned me not to drink a pot of old coffee. It seemed like a small thing, but something about it bothered me. So, on a hunch, I had our internal security team, a team Mr. Hayes doesn't know about, pull the full logs from that night." He projected a new video onto the screen. It was crystal clear, time-stamped. It showed the same finance analyst from the complaint sneaking into the kitchenette late at night. It showed him opening a small vial and pouring a clear liquid into the coffee machine's water reservoir. The liquid was a mild, odorless industrial solvent, Julian explained, his voice low and dangerous. Not enough to kill someone, but enough to cause severe gastric distress. A high-stress CEO suddenly falling ill right before a takeover bid. It would have created panic, uncertainty. The beginning of his plan. He then displayed bank records, obtained legally through his security team's investigation, showing a direct payment from a shell corporation owned by Derek to the analyst. Finally, he played a secretly recorded audio file. It was the analyst, confessing everything to Julian's head of security, explaining how Derek had coerced him, threatening to expose his gambling debts if he didn't comply. The boardroom was utterly silent. Derek's face was a mask of pale, sweating shock. Julian turned off the screen and faced the board, his heart pounding. This was the moment. Derek Hayes didn't just try to take my company. He tried to poison me. He blackmailed one of my employees. And he tried to force me to ruin an innocent man to cover his tracks. He took a deep breath, his gaze sweeping over the stunned faces. For 10 years, I have run this company with a single-minded focus on the bottom line. I have treated people like assets and integrity as a liability. I was wrong. His voice cracked with emotion, but he pushed on. The value of this company is not in its stock price or its market share. It's in its people. It's in the quiet dignity of a man like Marcus Thorne, who works 2 jobs to care for his daughter, who shows up every night and does his work with honor. His integrity is worth more than this entire company, and I will not sacrifice him. Not for you, he snarled at Derek. Not for anyone. He looked at the chairman. I will be turning this evidence over to the authorities. The fallout for the company will be significant. If you wish to remove me as CEO, I will understand. But know this, we can rebuild a company. We can recover from a financial loss. But we can never recover the moment we trade our humanity for profit. He stood there, exposed and vulnerable, having detonated his own life. He had made his choice. He had chosen love. He had chosen integrity. And whatever happened next, he knew with absolute certainty that he had finally saved himself. The boardroom erupted. In the ensuing chaos, Derek Hayes was quietly escorted out by security, his face ashen, his empire beginning to crumble. The board, faced with the irrefutable evidence of Derek's crimes and moved by Julian's impassioned, uncharacteristic speech, gave him a unanimous vote of confidence. They didn't just want him to stay. They wanted to build the kind of company he had just described. The victory was absolute, but Julian felt none of the familiar thrill of a corporate win. His only thought was of Marcus. He drove to Marcus's apartment building, a modest, clean brick walk-up in a quiet neighborhood, taking the stairs 2 at a time. He knocked on the door, his heart hammering against his ribs. When Marcus opened it, Julian's stomach dropped. The small living room behind him was filled with cardboard boxes. He was packing. "Mr. Vance," Marcus said, his face a mixture of surprise and sorrow. "I heard about the complaint. I don't know how it happened. I swear I didn't take anything. But I don't want to cause you any more trouble. Lily and I will be gone by morning." "No," Julian said, his voice firm, stepping inside. "You're not going anywhere." He quickly, breathlessly explained everything that had happened. The setup, Derek's ultimatum, the board meeting, the evidence. He told Marcus how he had been the catalyst, how his simple warning about the coffee had unraveled the entire conspiracy. As he spoke, Marcus's weary expression slowly transformed, first to disbelief, then to dawning understanding, and finally, to overwhelming relief. The weight of the false accusation lifted from his shoulders. You did that for me?" Marcus asked, his voice thick with emotion. "You would have risked your whole company?" "It wasn't a risk," Julian said, meeting his gaze. "It was a choice. You and Lily. You taught me what's actually worth protecting." He looked around the small, warm apartment, at the half-packed boxes that represented a life ready to flee to protect him. "You're not just an employee, Marcus. I hope you'll let us be your family." It was a clumsy, heartfelt declaration, all the more powerful for its lack of polish. The air between them was charged, filled with everything that had been unspoken for months. In that moment of profound emotional honesty, a small figure appeared from the bedroom doorway. It was Lily. She had been listening. She looked at her father, whose eyes were shining with tears. Then she looked at Julian, who stood before them, his corporate armor gone, his heart laid bare. She saw the truth of his words, the sincerity of his plea. She walked slowly across the room and stood directly in front of him. She reached out and placed her small hand in his. Julian's breath hitched. He looked down at her, his vision blurring. Lily looked up at him, her wide, soulful eyes holding his. And then, in a voice that was soft, clear, and utterly miraculous, she spoke the first word he had ever heard her say. "Stay." 6 months later, The city skyline looked different from the backyard of the house. It was no longer a cold, distant circuit board, but a beautiful, glittering backdrop to the sound of laughter. The house was not a minimalist penthouse but a warm, sprawling home with a scuffed wooden floor, overflowing bookshelves, and a big, comfortable sofa. The rooftop garden had been meticulously transplanted to the yard, where it now thrived in the open air. Julian, dressed in jeans and a faded t-shirt, knelt in the rich soil, showing Lily how to tie a sprawling tomato vine to a stake. "You see," he said, his hands guiding hers, "you have to give it support so it can grow strong." Lily, who now chattered with the joyful abandon of a child making up for lost time, nodded seriously. "Like how Dad supports me, and you support Dad." Julian's heart swelled. He looked over at Marcus, who was on the porch, sanding a piece of wood for a birdhouse he was building. Marcus caught his eye and smiled, a radiant, easy smile that was now a permanent fixture on his face. The exhaustion was gone, replaced by a deep and abiding peace. After the scandal, Julian had indeed restructured his company. He had instituted new policies, profit-sharing programs, and better benefits for all employees, from the mailroom to the executive suite. He appointed a new COO to handle the day-to-day operations, freeing himself to focus on the bigger picture, and to be home for dinner every night. He had sold the penthouse, leaving the cage behind for good. That evening, the three of them sat around the dinner table, the aroma of Marcus's cooking filling the air. Lily was telling an elaborate story about a squirrel in the park, complete with sound effects and dramatic gestures. Julian and Marcus exchanged a look of pure, unadulterated happiness. Later, after Lily was tucked into bed, the two men sat on the porch swing, the chains creaking a gentle rhythm in the quiet of the evening. "Do you ever miss it?" Marcus asked softly. "The view from the 40th floor." Julian thought for a moment, watching a firefly blink in the growing dusk. "I thought that view was everything," he said. "I thought it meant I had one, but I was just looking at the world from a distance." He reached out and took Marcus's hand, their fingers lacing together naturally, perfectly. "This is the real view, right here." He had once believed that his life was defined by a great loss, a betrayal that had hollowed him out and left him with nothing but a hunger for revenge and an obsession with control. He had built an empire on that empty foundation, thinking that if he acquired enough, he could fill the void. But he had been wrong. The greatest treasures of his life were not things he had acquired. They were gifts he had been given. The trust of a good man, the love of a remarkable child. He had to face the terror of losing everything he thought he wanted to finally gain everything he had ever truly needed. He had won, after all. Not a company, not a war, but a life.